The champagne glass shattered across marble like a gunshot, and Lena Hart's entire world shattered with it. 3 years of silent devotion, of making herself invisible to be worthy of Victor Hale's love, ended in one brutal sentence spoken loud enough for 200 powerful guests to hear. But humiliation wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. Because in that gilded ballroom, a man far more dangerous than Victor was watching. A man who would turn her ruin into rain, her brokenness into power. If she was brave enough to take his hand and walk into the fire. If you're ready for a story of betrayal, power, and ruthless redemption, stay with me until the end. And when you finish, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far Lena's transformation reaches across the world. The Ashford Hotel didn't just host events. It swallowed them whole and spit out legends. Tonight's engagement party for the Hale and Westbrook families occupied the entire 7th floor, a sprawling ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Lena Hart had worked at the Ashford for 2 years, long enough to know which guests tipped and which ones looked through her like she was furniture, long enough to perfect the art of being invisible. She should have stayed invisible tonight. Her black service uniform was pressed crisp, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun that made her delicate features look sharper, older. At 26, she'd mastered the posture of someone who took up as little space as possible, shoulders slightly curved, eyes downcast, movements efficient and silent. The other servers called her Ghost. Not to her face, but she'd heard it whispered in the break room. It used to hurt. Now she wore it like armor. The ballroom was a study in excess. White roses imported from Ecuador, each bloom perfect and scentless. Ice sculptures shaped like swans, already weeping in the heat from too many bodies. A string quartet playing something classical and forgettable, while 200 people in formal wear networked, laughed, and assessed each other's worth with every handshake. Lena had served at dozens of these events. She knew the choreography. Keep the champagne flowing, clear the empty plates before anyone noticed them, become part of the scenery. But tonight was different. Tonight, Victor Hale was here. She felt him before she saw him, the way you feel a storm building pressure in your bones. 3 years of loving him had given her a terrible radar for his presence. She spotted him near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tall frame relaxed in a custom navy suit that probably cost what she made in 6 months. His dark blonde hair was styled just messy enough to look careless, and his smile, that effortless, charming smile, was aimed at a woman in an emerald dress that matched her eyes. Catherine Westbrook, his fiancée. Lena's hands trembled as she lifted a tray of champagne flutes from the service bar. She knew she shouldn't look at him. Looking only made it hurt worse, made the 3 years of secret meetings and whispered promises feel more like the lies they'd turned out to be. But she couldn't help herself. She'd spent so long memorizing every detail of Victor Hale, the way his jaw tightened when he was irritated, the half smile he gave when he was genuinely amused versus the full one he deployed like a weapon in business. She knew him, or she'd thought she did. "Stop gawking and move," Julia, the lead server, hissed as she passed. "Table 12 needs refills." Lena jerked into motion, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. Table 12 was occupied by older men in expensive suits, the kind who smelled like cigars and old money. They didn't look at her when she refilled their glasses. She preferred it that way. The evening progressed with mechanical precision. Past appetizers, smoked salmon on brioche, something with truffle oil that made her stomach turn, cleared plates, smiled blandly at people who snapped fingers for her attention. Her feet ached in the regulation black heels, but she'd learned to disconnect from physical discomfort years ago. Pain was just sensation. It didn't have to mean anything. She was collecting empty glasses from a high-top table when she heard Victor's laugh. Not the public one, bright and performative, but the real one. Low and warm, the sound he'd made when they were alone in his apartment, when he'd traced patterns on her bare shoulder and told her she was different from the others. Special. Lena's fingers tightened around the stem of a champagne flute. She should walk away, should retreat to the kitchen and compose herself. But something kept her rooted there, half hidden behind a marble column, watching as Victor leaned close to Catherine and whispered something that made her laugh and swat his arm playfully. "They make a beautiful couple, don't they?" The voice came from her left. Another guest, a woman in her 50s wearing diamonds that could fund a small country. She wasn't talking to Lena, just speaking into the air the way people did when servers were present, but not really there. The Hale and Westbrook merger has been years in the making, her companion replied, a man with silver hair and a signet ring. Victor played it perfectly. Catherine brings the East Coast connections his family needs, and her father gets access to Hale Industries' international portfolio. Brilliant match. I heard he had some little fling before this. Nobody important. Lena's heart stopped beating. Just stopped. Like someone had reached into her chest and squeezed. Victor Hale always has flings. The man collects women like some men collect cars. The silver-haired man chuckled. But he knows where his real future lies. Always has. They moved away, absorbed back into the crowd, leaving Lena standing there with a tray of empty glasses and the shattered remains of 3 years' worth of hope. Nobody important. The words echoed in her skull with the weight of absolute truth. She forced herself to move, to continue working, but something had cracked inside her. The careful numbness she'd cultivated was fracturing, and underneath it was a howling void of rage and grief that terrified her. She'd been so careful, so patient. Victor had said they needed to wait, that his family wouldn't understand, that building his position at Hale Industries required certain strategic appearances. She'd believed him, believed that their stolen hours together meant something, that when he touched her face and called her beautiful, he meant it, nobody important. The announcement came at 9 o'clock sharp. Victor's father, Richard Hale, took the microphone and called for everyone's attention. The room fell silent with the practiced ease of people accustomed to being heard. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," Richard began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been denied anything. "It is my profound pleasure to officially announce the engagement of my son, Victor Hale, to Catherine Westbrook." Applause erupted. Victor and Catherine moved to the center of the room, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, both of them glowing with the confidence of people who'd been promised the world and believed it was theirs by right. Lena stood at the edge of the room, tray balanced on one hand, and felt something inside her die. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just a quiet internal collapse, like a building falling in on itself in slow motion. "The wedding will take place this December," Richard continued, "here at the Ashford. We're expecting it to be the social event of the season." More applause. Someone called for a toast. Lena turned away, unable to watch anymore, and nearly collided with Julia. "Get more champagne from the service bar," Julia ordered, "and try not to look like someone killed your dog. This is supposed to be a celebration." Lena nodded mechanically and headed for the service corridor that connected to the kitchen. The narrow hallway was blessedly empty, the sounds of the party muffled by thick walls. She set her tray down on a utility cart and pressed her hands against the cool wall, trying to breathe through the pressure building in her chest. 3 years. 3 years of making herself small, of accepting whatever scraps of time Victor could spare, of believing that patience and devotion would eventually be enough. She'd turned down other opportunities, other men who'd shown interest, because she'd been certain that Victor was worth waiting for, that what they had was real. Nobody important. The door to the ballroom opened and voices spilled out. Victor's voice, low and irritated, followed by Catherine's lighter tone. "I don't understand why you're so tense," Catherine was saying. "This is supposed to be our night." "I'm not tense, I just need a minute." Lena's instinct was to flee, to disappear into the kitchen before they saw her, but her body had stopped obeying her. She stood frozen in the corridor as Victor and Catherine rounded the corner, so absorbed in their conversation they didn't notice her at first. "You've been distant all week," Catherine pressed. "If there's something bothering you, there's nothing bothering me." Victor's tone had that edge it got when he was lying. Lena knew that edge intimately. Everything is exactly as it should be. Then his eyes landed on Lena, and for just a second, less than a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Recognition? It was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Catherine followed his gaze and smiled politely, the way people smiled at service staff they were about to forget. "Could we get some champagne?" Lena's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stood there, staring at Victor, waiting for something. Acknowledgement, shame, anything that proved the last 3 years had been real. Victor looked back at her with perfect, practiced blankness. No recognition, No guilt, just the faint impatience of someone waiting for the help to do their job. The champagne? Catherine prompted, her smile beginning to cool. Something snapped. Later, Lena wouldn't be able to explain what happened in that moment. Maybe it was the careful numbness finally shattering completely. Maybe it was 3 years of swallowing her own worth catching in her throat. Maybe it was just the simple, devastating realization that she had never mattered at all. No, Lena heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant. Get it yourself. Catherine's eyes widened. Victor's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Excuse me? Catherine's voice climbed half an octave. I said no. Lena took a step forward, her hands curling into fists at her sides. I'm not getting you champagne. I'm not getting you anything. Do you have any idea who we are? Catherine demanded, her composure cracking. I will have you fired for this insolence. Let me save you the trouble. Lena yanked off the small name tag pinned to her uniform and let it clatter to the floor. I quit. She turned to walk away, but Victor's hand shot out and caught her wrist. His grip was firm enough to hurt, his fingers digging into the tender skin there. For 3 years, those hands had been gentle with her, reverent even. Now they held her like she was something to be restrained. What the hell do you think you're doing? Victor's voice was low, dangerous. His public mask had slipped, revealing something colder underneath. Lena stared at his hand on her wrist, then slowly lifted her eyes to his face. Let go of me. You're making a scene. Do you want to humiliate yourself? The laugh that escaped her was harsh, broken. Humiliate myself? That's rich coming from you. Catherine was watching them with growing suspicion, her sharp intelligence piecing together a picture Lena could see forming in real time. Victor, do you know this girl? No, Victor said immediately, his eyes locked on Lena's. I've never seen her before in my life. The words landed like physical blows. Lena felt each one, felt them tear through the last shreds of hope she'd been clinging to. His face was so calm, so convincing. He could erase her that easily. 3 years reduced to nothing with 4 words. Liar, Lena whispered. Victor's grip tightened. You need to leave, now, before you do something you'll regret. Something I'll regret? Lena's voice was rising now, emotion flooding past all her careful controls. I already did something I regret. I wasted 3 years believing you actually... Enough! Victor jerked her closer, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled like the expensive scotch he preferred, and his eyes were cold enough to burn. You were a distraction, a way to pass time. If you thought it was anything more than that, you're even more pathetic than I realized. The words should have destroyed her. Maybe they did. But destruction has a way of burning clear, of reducing everything to essential truths. And the truth was that Lena Hart had spent 3 years making herself smaller, quieter, more invisible, trying to be worthy of a man who had never seen her as anything but entertainment. She stopped pulling against his grip and went very still. When she spoke, her voice was eerily calm. Let go of me, Victor. Or what? He leaned closer, his smile cruel. You'll make a scene? Tell everyone about our little arrangement? Nobody would believe you. Nobody would care. Let go of me, she repeated, each word precise and cold, or I'll scream so loud every person in that ballroom will come running. For a moment, she thought he would call her bluff. His fingers dug deeper into her wrist, hard enough that she knew there would be bruises. But something in her expression must have convinced him she meant it, because he released her with a sharp movement and stepped back. You're insane, he said flatly. Catherine, we're leaving. This isn't worth our time. But Catherine wasn't looking at Victor anymore. She was staring at Lena with an expression that was equal parts contempt and pity. How long? Lena blinked. What? How long were you sleeping with my fiancé? Catherine's voice was remarkably steady, like she was asking about the weather. The question hung in the air between them. Victor's face had gone very pale. Catherine, she's clearly delusional. Don't! Catherine held up one perfectly manicured hand. I'm asking her, not you. She turned back to Lena, her green eyes sharp as cut glass. How long? Lena could have lied, could have protected Victor one last time. But why? What did she owe him now? 3 years, she said quietly. Give or take. Catherine absorbed this information with remarkable composure. She nodded slowly, then turned to Victor. 3 years. The entire time we've been planning this merger. The entire time you've been telling me I'm the only one who understands you. She's lying. Victor started, but Catherine cut him off with a look. No, she's not. I can always tell when someone's lying, Victor. It's one of my more useful talents. She smoothed down her emerald dress, every movement controlled. We'll discuss this later, in private. Right now, we have 200 guests waiting for us to make toasts and cut the cake. She walked past Lena without another glance, her heels clicking authoritatively against the marble floor. Victor hesitated for just a moment, his eyes meeting Lena's one last time. You just destroyed your own life, he said quietly. I hope it was worth it. Then he was gone, following Catherine back into the ballroom, leaving Lena alone in the service corridor with nothing but the wreckage of 3 years and the growing numbness spreading through her chest. She should leave, should walk out the service entrance and never look back, but her legs wouldn't move. She stood there, staring at the spot where Victor had been, and felt the full weight of her stupidity crushing down on her. Nobody important, a distraction, a way to pass time. The door to the ballroom was still slightly ajar. Through the gap, Lena could hear Richard Hale's voice rising above the crowd, calling for quiet, calling for a toast. She knew she shouldn't look, knew it would only hurt worse, but pain was familiar now, almost comforting in its inevitability. She moved closer to the door, just close enough to see through the narrow opening. The ballroom had transformed into a perfect tableau of wealth and power. Victor and Catherine stood at the center, his arm around her waist, her smile brittle but intact. Richard raised his glass high, the crystal catching the light from the chandeliers. To my son and his beautiful bride-to-be, Richard proclaimed, may their union bring prosperity to both our families for generations to come. Hear, hear, someone called out, and the room erupted in agreement. 200 glasses raised in unison. 200 people celebrating a merger because that's what it was. Not love, not partnership. Just business wrapped in white roses and empty promises. Lena watched Victor lean down and kiss Catherine, watched the crowd applaud, and felt something inside her finally, irrevocably break. Not her heart, that had shattered hours ago in the corridor. This was something deeper, the last remnants of hope. The final traces of the girl who'd believed that being patient and small and perfect would be enough to earn real love. She turned away from the door and picked up a tray of champagne flutes that needed to be carried back to the ballroom. Her hands were shaking so badly, the glasses clinked together in dangerous harmony. She took 3 steps before her vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back for hours. The tray slipped. In retrospect, it happened slowly. Lena felt her grip fail, felt the silver tray tilting, felt gravity asserting its inevitable pull. She tried to compensate, tried to catch it, but her hands were trembling too badly. The tray hit the floor with a sound like thunder, and 12 champagne flutes shattered in a spectacular explosion of crystal and expensive liquor. The crash silenced the ballroom instantly. Lena stood frozen in the doorway, her black uniform now soaked with champagne, surrounded by glittering shards of broken glass. Every single person in that enormous room turned to stare at her. 200 faces swiveling in unison, 200 pairs of eyes landing on the clumsy server who'd interrupted their celebration. The silence stretched. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered something behind their hand. Then Victor's voice cut through the quiet, loud enough for everyone to hear. Of course, some people just can't handle being around their betters without making a spectacle. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nervous at first, then building as people latched onto the joke, grateful for permission to release the tension. Lena stood there, champagne dripping from her clothes, and felt the laughter wash over her like acid. Someone get this mess cleaned up, Catherine called out, her voice bright and unbothered. And get that girl out of here before she breaks something else. More laughter. Julia appeared from somewhere, her face tight with fury, already gesturing for the other servers to handle the broken glass. She grabbed Lena's arm hard enough to bruise and hauled her away from the doorway, away from the staring faces and the cruel laughter. What the hell is wrong with you? Julia hissed as she dragged Lena down the service corridor. Do you have any idea what you just did? Mister, Ashford is going to have your head for this. Lena couldn't find words, could barely find breath. She let Julia pull her along, her mind replaying the moment over and over, The crash, the silence, Victor's voice dripping with contempt. Some people just can't handle being around their betters. After everything they'd shared, every intimate moment, every whispered promise, he'd reduced her to that. A clumsy servant who didn't belong. Julia shoved her into the staff break room and slammed the door. "Stay here. Don't move. Don't even breathe until I figure out how to handle this." Then she was gone, and Lena was alone with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and her soaking wet uniform clinging to her skin. She sank onto one of the plastic chairs and stared at her hands. They were still shaking. There was a small cut on her palm from the broken glass, a thin line of red against her pale skin. She should feel something. Humiliation, anger, grief, something appropriate to the moment. But there was only numbness now, spreading through her like frost. She'd lost her job, her dignity. 3 years of her life to a man who thought of her as an amusing distraction, and in front of 200 people who would forget her by tomorrow. The door opened. Lena didn't look up, assuming it was Julia coming back to fire her officially, but the footsteps were wrong, heavier, more deliberate. When she finally raised her eyes, she found herself looking at a man she'd never seen before. He was tall, easily 6'2", with the kind of presence that seemed to compress the air around him. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and controlled intensity. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, and even in her current state, Lena could recognize quality when she saw it. But it was his eyes that stopped her, pale gray, almost silver in the harsh fluorescent light, and looking at her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. "You're hurt," he said. His voice was low, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe, but softened by years somewhere else. Lena glanced down at the cut on her palm. "It's nothing." "Let me see." It wasn't a request. The man moved closer and took her hand before she could protest, examining the wound with clinical efficiency. His fingers were warm against her skin, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone who radiated such controlled danger. "It's shallow," he said after a moment. "It won't scar." "Good to know," Lena managed. She tried to pull her hand back, but his grip tightened slightly. "You have other injuries?" Again, not a question. He turned her wrist, exposing the bruises Victor's fingers had left. 4 perfect circles, already darkening to purple against her pale skin. Lena's throat tightened. She hadn't looked at them yet, hadn't acknowledged what Victor had done. But seeing them now, displayed in this stranger's hand, made them real in a way that bypassed all her careful numbness. "Who did this to you?" The man's voice had gone very quiet, very cold. "It doesn't matter." "It matters." He released her wrist carefully, but his eyes never left her face. "I saw what happened in the ballroom. The man who humiliated you, Victor Hale. He did this?" Lena's instinct was to deny it, to protect Victor one more time. But what was the point? He'd already made it clear what she was to him. "Yes," she whispered. The man nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already known. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card, heavy stock, expensive, with nothing but a phone number embossed in silver. "My name is Alessio Moretti," he said, pressing the card into her hand. "If you need help, real help, not the kind that comes with conditions, call that number." Lena stared at the card, confusion cutting through her numbness. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Something flickered in those pale eyes. Not pity, something colder and more dangerous. "Let's just say I don't like men who hurt women and then make a show of it. Call it a personal policy." He straightened and headed for the door, his movements economical and precise. But before he left, he paused and looked back at her. "That man out there? Victor Hale?" Alessio's smile was sharp enough to cut. "He just made a very serious mistake. People who leave bruises on women in my city tend to regret it." Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with a business card and a growing sense that something fundamental had just shifted in the architecture of her ruined evening. She looked down at the card, at the embossed number catching the light, and felt the first stirring of something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't resignation either. Through the walls, she could hear the party continuing. More toasts, more laughter. The Hale and Westbrook engagement celebration rolling on without her, as if she'd never existed at all. Nobody important. Lena closed her fingers around the business card and felt its sharp edges press into her palm. Maybe that was true. Maybe she'd never been important to Victor, or to anyone in that ballroom. But something about the way Alessio Moretti had looked at her bruises, the cold promise in his voice when he'd talked about regrets, that suggested maybe, just maybe, she could become someone who mattered, even if it meant walking into a different kind of danger entirely. Lena sat in that break room for 20 minutes, staring at Alessio Moretti's business card like it might spontaneously combust. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a persistent electrical hum that matched the static in her brain. Her uniform had started to dry in stiff, uncomfortable patches where the champagne had soaked through. The cut on her palm had stopped bleeding, leaving a thin red line that would probably fade in a few days. The bruises on her wrist wouldn't fade nearly as fast. The door swung open and Julia walked in, her expression carved from ice. Behind her stood Mr. Ashford himself, the hotel's general manager, a thin man in his 50s who looked like he'd never had an original thought in his life. "Miss Hart," Mr. Ashford began, his voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment reserved for servants who'd forgotten their place. "I'm sure you understand that your employment here is terminated, effective immediately." Lena looked up at him, and something must have shown in her face because he actually took a small step back. "I quit an hour ago," she said quietly. "You're about 60 minutes late." Julia's eyes narrowed. "You need to leave, now. Security will escort you if necessary." "That won't be necessary." Lena stood, tucking the business card into her pocket. Her legs felt steadier than they had any right to, given that her entire life had just imploded. "I'm already gone." She walked past them both, past Julia's satisfied smirk and Mr. Ashford's obvious relief, and headed for the employee entrance. The service corridors of the Ashford were a maze of beige walls and industrial carpet, designed to keep the working class invisible from the guests. Lena had walked these hallways hundreds of times, always in a hurry, always trying to be efficient and forgettable. Now she took her time, letting each step feel deliberate. The employee locker room was empty. Most of the other servers were still working the engagement party, probably scrambling to cover her abandoned station. Lena opened her locker and pulled out her street clothes, jeans, a gray sweater, sneakers that had seen better days. She changed mechanically, stuffing her ruined uniform into the trash bin. Let them bill her for it. Let them try. Her phone buzzed as she was lacing up her sneakers. A text from her roommate, Maya. "Running late? Don't wait up." Lena stared at the message, trying to remember what normal life looked like. Maya worked as a graphic designer for a small firm downtown, kept regular hours, had a boyfriend who took her to Sunday brunch. Maya's problems were things like client revisions and whether to cut bangs. Maya had never spent 3 years in love with a man who thought of her as a distraction. Lena deleted the text without responding and grabbed her jacket from the locker. The business card was still in her pocket, a small weight that seemed to pulse with possibility. Or danger. Possibly both. The employee exit led to an alley behind the Ashford, the kind of space that existed in every luxury hotel, where the garbage went, where deliveries happened, where the machinery of service stayed hidden from paying guests. It was nearly 10 o'clock now, the November air sharp enough to sting. Lena pulled her jacket tighter and started walking, not entirely sure where she was going, but knowing she couldn't go back inside. She made it 3 steps before she heard voices from the other end of the alley. "Don't care what excuses you have. Mr. Moretti was very clear about the timeline." Lena froze. The voice was male, hard-edged, with an accent similar to Alessio's but rougher around the vowels. She should keep walking, should mind her own business, but something made her pause in the shadows near the dumpsters. 2 men stood near a black SUV, their body language tense. One was built like a linebacker, all shoulders and compressed violence. The other was leaner, dressed in a dark coat, smoking a cigarette with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for decades. "The shipment will be ready when it's ready," the smoker said, flicking ash onto the pavement. "You can't rush quality. You can when you've already been paid." The linebacker moved closer, and even from her hiding spot, Lena could feel the threat radiating off him. "Mr. Moretti doesn't accept excuses. He accepts results. Tell Mr. Moretti that if he wants results, he should stop sending children to handle negotiations." The smoker took a long drag, his expression bored. "I've been in this business since before you learned to tie your shoes. I know how it works." The linebacker's hand moved to his jacket, and Lena's breath caught. She'd lived in the city long enough to recognize the shape of a weapon, the way men touched them for reassurance or warning. But before anything could escalate, another figure emerged from the SUV's back seat. Alessio Moretti stepped into the alley with the calm of someone who knew every eye would turn to him. He looked different than he had in the break room, colder, harder, like he'd put on authority the way other men put on coats. The linebacker immediately stepped back, his hand dropping from his jacket. "Gentlemen," Alessio said, his voice carrying easily in the confined space. "Is there a problem?" The smoker straightened slightly, a tell that said he recognized power when he saw it. "No problem. Just a discussion about timelines." "I see." Alessio moved closer, his movements unhurried. "And in this discussion, were you planning to deliver what you promised, or were you planning to insult my associate and waste my time?" The smoker's jaw tightened. "The shipment will be ready by Friday." "That's 4 days late." "Quality takes. You have until tomorrow night." Alessio's voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It simply stated a fact. "Midnight. If the shipment isn't ready, we'll consider our business relationship terminated, permanently." The weight in that last word made Lena's skin prickle. The smoker must have heard it too, because his casual demeanor cracked just slightly. "Tomorrow night," he agreed. "Midnight." Alessio nodded once, dismissive, and turned back toward the SUV. That's when his eyes landed on Lena, still half hidden in the shadows near the dumpsters. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, but a calculation happening too fast to track. "Wait in the car," he told the linebacker without looking away from Lena. "I'll be there in a moment." The linebacker hesitated for just a second before nodding and climbing back into the SUV. The smoker had already disappeared, probably grateful for the excuse to leave. Alessio walked toward Lena with measured steps, and she found herself paralyzed between the instinct to run and the strange certainty that running would be pointless. He stopped a few feet away, his pale eyes reflecting the alley's dim lights. "You have a talent for being in places you shouldn't be." "I work here," Lena said, then corrected herself. "Worked here, past tense as of an hour ago." "I heard about that." Alessio tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You're not screaming or running. Most people who overhear my business conversations do one or both." "Would it matter if I did?" A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "No." "But it would be louder." Lena pulled her jacket tighter against the cold. "What do you want? You already gave me the mysterious business card and the cryptic warning. Was there more to the recruitment speech?" "Recruitment?" Alessio's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what this is, but you don't seem like the kind of man who helps strangers out of the goodness of his heart." "You're right, I'm not." He moved closer, close enough that Lena had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "But I also don't like seeing women brutalized and humiliated by men who think power makes them untouchable. Call it a character flaw." "So what? You're my white knight?" The words came out sharper than Lena intended, edged with all the broken glass still lodged in her chest. "You saw a damsel in distress and decided to save her?" "No." Alessio's voice went very quiet. "I saw someone who'd been hurt by a coward, and I decided that cowards should face consequences. Whether you need saving is entirely up to you." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Lena knew she should walk away. This man radiated danger the way the sun radiated heat, constant, undeniable, potentially lethal. But danger was starting to look better than the alternative, which was going back to her tiny apartment and pretending the last 3 years hadn't happened. "The card you gave me," she said slowly. "If I called that number, what would happen?" "You'd reach someone who works for me. They'd ask what you need. And if what I need is to make Victor Hale regret what he did?" Something flickered in Alessio's eyes, approval maybe, or recognition. "Then we'd have that conversation, but understand something first." He stepped even closer, close enough that Lena could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive. "The kind of regret I deal in isn't legal or clean. It's not restraining orders or strongly worded letters. If you want Victor Hale to truly understand what he's done, you need to be certain you're ready for what that means." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. Every rational part of her brain was screaming warnings, telling her to thank him politely and walk away. But rationality had gotten her exactly nowhere. Rationality had kept her patient and small and invisible for 3 years, while Victor Hale used her and discarded her without a second thought. "I'm ready," she heard herself say. Alessio studied her face for a long moment, and Lena had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen completely. Every broken piece, every humiliation, every desperate hope she was trying to hide. Finally, he nodded. "Come with me." "Where?" "Somewhere we can talk properly. Unless you'd prefer to do this in an alley." Lena glanced at the black SUV, at the linebacker waiting in the driver's seat, at the entire sketchy scenario unfolding around her. Every safety lesson she'd ever learned said this was exactly how people disappeared. But then again, she'd already disappeared tonight. Victor had erased her in front of 200 people. How much more gone could she get? "Fine," she said. "But if this is some elaborate kidnapping scheme, I should warn you I'm not worth any ransom." That ghost of a smile appeared again. "Noted." He opened the back door of the SUV and gestured for her to get in. Lena climbed inside, her hands shaking slightly, and tried to slow her racing pulse. The interior was leather and darkness, tinted windows blocking out the alley. Alessio slid in beside her and nodded to the driver. "The office," he said simply. The SUV pulled out of the alley with smooth precision. Lena watched the city slide past through darkened windows, familiar streets looking strange and distant. She kept waiting for fear to hit, for survival instinct to kick in and demand she throw herself from a moving vehicle. But all she felt was a strange, detached curiosity about what happened next. "You're not afraid," Alessio observed after several minutes of silence. "I'm terrified," Lena corrected. "I'm just tired of letting fear make my decisions." He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "What were you to Victor Hale? Before tonight?" The question was direct, surgical. Lena could lie, could deflect, could maintain some shred of privacy. But what was the point? "Everything," she said quietly. "Or I thought I was. Turns out I was just convenient." 3 years is a long time to be convenient. 3 years is a long time to be stupid. Lena stared at her hands, at the bruises circling her wrist. "I kept thinking if I was patient enough, if I didn't ask for too much, if I just loved him the right way, he'd choose me. He'd see what we had was real. And tonight you learned it wasn't real. Tonight I learned I was never even in the running." She laughed, the sound bitter. Catherine Westbrook. That's who he was always going to choose, someone from his world. Someone who brings connections and legitimacy and all the things a waitress could never offer. Alessio was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Lena turned, surprised by the question. "What?" "Someone who survived 3 years of being made small and still had enough spine left to quit in the middle of a shift. Someone who dropped a tray of champagne and walked through 200 people's judgment without breaking. Someone who's standing in a moving vehicle with a dangerous stranger and asking questions instead of begging." His pale eyes caught the passing streetlights. "Victor Hale is a fool, but his foolishness is about to become very expensive." The SUV turned down a street Lena didn't recognize, pulling into an underground parking garage beneath a sleek, modern building. The driver parked in a reserved spot near an elevator, and Alessio climbed out, waiting for Lena to follow. The elevator required a key card to operate. They rode up in silence, the numbers climbing past residential floors into something that looked more commercial. When the doors opened, Lena found herself in a hallway that screamed money. Dark wood, recessed lighting, the kind of hushed atmosphere that came from soundproofing and serious security. Alessio led her to a door at the end of the hall and unlocked it with a fingerprint scan. The office beyond was masculine and minimalist, all clean lines and expensive furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, thousands of lights spreading out like a circuit board. A desk dominated one side of the room, its surface clear except for a laptop and a single lamp. "Sit," Alessio said, gesturing to a leather chair near the windows. "Would you like a drink?" "Water," Lena said, because alcohol seemed like a terrible idea right now. He poured her water from a bar cart and handed it to her, then poured himself 2 fingers of something amber. Scotch, probably. He moved to stand near the windows, his back to the city, his full attention on her. "Tell me exactly what happened tonight," he said. "Everything. Don't leave anything out." So Lena told him. About loving Victor for 3 years, about the secret meetings and the promises that never materialized, about believing she was special when she was really just convenient, about the engagement party and the confrontation in the corridor and the way Victor had grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise, about the champagne flutes shattering across marble and 200 people laughing while she stood there soaking wet and destroyed. Alessio listened without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. When she finished, he took a slow sip of his scotch. Victor Hale will be at his office tomorrow, he said finally. He keeps regular hours. Tuesdays and Thursdays, he has lunch at a restaurant 3 blocks from Hale Industries. Always the same table, always the same order. Lena blinked. How do you know that? I make it my business to know things about powerful men in this city. Information is currency. He set his glass down on the desk with careful precision. Tomorrow, Victor will receive a visit. Nothing violent, nothing that leaves marks. Just a conversation about respect and consequences. What kind of conversation? The kind that makes men reconsider their choices. Alessio moved closer, and Lena found herself trapped between his gaze and the leather chair. But that's just the opening move. If you want real consequences, the kind that echo, you need to be willing to play a longer game. Lena's throat felt dry despite the water. What kind of game? The kind where you become someone he can't ignore, someone with power of your own. Alessio tilted his head slightly. I can offer you that. Protection, resources, opportunity, a chance to rebuild yourself into someone who doesn't get bruised and humiliated. In exchange for what? Nothing you wouldn't be willing to give. His voice dropped lower. I don't deal in coercion, Lena. If you work with me, it's because you choose to. If you want to walk out that door right now and never see me again, you can. No consequences, no retribution, just walk away. It was the strangest job offer Lena had ever received, if it even was a job offer. She studied Alessio's face, looking for deception or hidden agendas, but found only patient certainty. He meant what he said. She could leave. But leaving meant going back to her apartment and her ruined life, and the knowledge that Victor Hale was probably already in bed with Catherine, the entire evening forgotten like it had never happened. What would I have to do? Lena asked quietly. For now? Disappear. Let me handle the immediate situation with Victor, then we'll discuss the future. Alessio pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. I'm sending a car to take you to a secure location. You'll stay there tonight. Tomorrow, we'll talk about next steps. A secure location. Lena laughed, though there was no humor in it. You mean a safe house, like I'm in witness protection. More comfortable than witness protection. And temporary, unless you decide you want more permanent arrangements. The phone in Lena's pocket buzzed. She pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. Black sedan. Downstairs in 5 minutes. Driver will have your name. She looked up at Alessio. You're very efficient. I don't waste time. He walked to his desk and pulled out a black credit card, sliding it across the surface toward her. For anything you need, clothes, food, whatever, no limit. Consider it a signing bonus. Lena stared at the card like it might bite her. I haven't signed anything. You're here. That's signature enough. His pale eyes held hers. Victor Hale tried to erase you tonight. I'm offering you the chance to rewrite the story. The only question is whether you're brave enough to take it. Every rational instinct said this was insane. That accepting help from a man who scared his own associates and talked about consequences in underground parking garages was possibly the worst decision she could make, but rationality had failed her spectacularly. Maybe it was time to try something else. Lena stood and picked up the credit card. It was heavy, the kind of weight that came from metal instead of plastic. Real, tangible, proof that this wasn't a fever dream brought on by humiliation and champagne. One condition, she said. Alessio's eyebrow rose. Which is? I want to know what you are, not your cover story or your business card title. The truth. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he smiled, and it was the most genuinely amused expression she'd seen from him yet. I'm a lot of things, Lena Hart. Some legal, some less so. I own property, run businesses, employ people who do work that ranges from legitimate to creative. But at the core, he moved closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. I'm someone who understands that power is the only real currency. Money can be lost. Reputation can be destroyed. But power, true power, is permanent. So you're a criminal. I'm an entrepreneur with flexible ethics. His smile sharpened. Does that change your answer? It should. It absolutely should. But Lena thought about Victor's hand on her wrist, about his cold eyes saying she was nobody important, about 3 years of making herself small for nothing. No, she said. It doesn't. Alessio nodded, something like satisfaction crossing his features. The car will be waiting. Go, rest. Tomorrow, everything changes. Lena walked to the door, her legs steadier than they'd been all night. She paused with her hand on the handle and looked back. Alessio had returned to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. And for just a moment, Lena wondered what it would feel like to have that kind of certainty, to move through the world like every door would open, every obstacle would yield. Thank you, she said quietly. He didn't turn around. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see what I do to people who hurt what's mine. The possessive in that sentence should have alarmed her. Instead, it sent a strange thrill down her spine. Lena left before she could analyze that feeling too closely. The black sedan was waiting exactly where promised, the driver a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She didn't ask questions, just drove through the city with professional efficiency. They ended up at a high-rise building in a neighborhood Lena recognized as expensive, the kind of place where doormen wore actual uniforms and lobbies had fresh flowers. The apartment was on the 15th floor, a modern space with gleaming hardwood and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The driver handed Lena a key card and a phone. Mr. Moretti's number is programmed in, she said. You need anything? You call. Someone will answer. Refrigerator's stocked. Bathroom's got everything. Don't answer the door for anyone except building staff. Then she was gone, leaving Lena alone in an apartment that probably cost more per month than she made in 6. She walked through the space slowly, touching surfaces to make sure they were real. The view from the windows showed the city spreading out in all directions, the same view she'd seen from Alessio's office, but from a different angle. Her phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number that had sent the car information. Sleep well. Tomorrow, we begin. Lena stared at those 3 words, feeling the weight of them settle into her bones. Tomorrow, we begin. Begin what, exactly? Revenge? Transformation? A descent into something she couldn't climb back out of? She walked to the bathroom and caught sight of herself in the mirror. Same dark hair, same delicate features, same ordinary face she'd seen every day for 26 years. But something in her eyes looked different, harder, more awake. Lena pulled off her jacket and rolled up her sleeve, exposing the bruises on her wrist. 4 perfect circles, Victor's fingerprints preserved in purple and yellow. Evidence of the moment she'd stopped being invisible and started being something else entirely. She thought about Alessio's promise, that Victor would face consequences. She thought about the cold certainty in his voice when he'd said power was permanent. She thought about how it felt to be erased, to be nobody important, to be 3 years' worth of love reduced to a distraction. Then Lena Hart made a decision that would change everything that came after. She picked up the phone Alessio's driver had given her and sent a single text to his program number. I'm in, whatever it takes. The response came 30 seconds later. Good. Rest now. The real work starts tomorrow. Lena set the phone down and walked to the bedroom, where she found pajamas laid out on a bed that looked like it cost more than her car. She changed mechanically, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow and all the ways her life was about to transform. But before she turned off the lights, she took one more look at the bruises on her wrist. And instead of feeling shame or pain, she felt something else entirely: anticipation. Lena woke to sunlight cutting through unfamiliar curtains and spent 3 disoriented seconds trying to remember where she was. Then it hit. The apartment. Alessio Moretti. The text she'd sent at midnight promising she was in. Her stomach lurched. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, half hoping last night had been some elaborate stress dream, but the message thread was still there, stark and real. The phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. A new text from Alessio's number. Car arrives at 10 a.m. Wear something comfortable. We have work to do. Lena checked the time. 8:30. She had 90 minutes to shower, eat, and figure out what the hell she'd gotten herself into She rolled out of the bed, which was, objectively, the most comfortable thing she'd ever slept on, and padded to the kitchen. True to the driver's word, the refrigerator was stocked with enough food for a week. Fresh fruit, yogurt, expensive coffee beans, and a grinder. She had no idea how to operate. She settled for toast and found herself staring out the window while she ate, watching the city wake up 15 floors below. Somewhere out there, Victor was probably having breakfast with Catherine, planning their December wedding, completely unaware that consequences were coming for him. The thought should have satisfied her. Instead, it just made her feel hollow. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Maya. "Where are you? Came home last night and your stuff is still here, but you're not. Are you okay?" Lena stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain the unexplainable. Finally, she typed, "Something came up. I'm fine, staying with a friend. We'll explain later." The response came immediately. "What friend? You don't have friends. No offense. None taken, since it was true." Lena had spent 3 years so focused on Victor that she'd let every other relationship atrophy. Maya was her roommate by circumstance more than choice, someone she split rent with and occasionally watched TV beside. The realization of how isolated she'd become hit harder than expected. "Just someone I met. I'm safe. Promise." She sent the text before she could overthink it, then muted her phone and went to shower. The bathroom had one of those rainfall shower heads and about 6 different bottles of expensive products Lena couldn't identify. She used something that smelled like bergamot and tried not to think about how much this single shower probably cost in water and luxury soap. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel that was somehow both impossibly soft and impossibly heavy, she found clothes laid out on the bed. Black jeans, a deep gray sweater that looked cashmere, leather boots that were definitely her size. Lena picked up the sweater, running her fingers over the fabric, and felt something close to panic rising in her chest. Someone had been in the apartment while she slept. Someone had known her size, her measurements, what would fit. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking slightly, and was just pulling on the boots when her phone buzzed with another text. "Driver is downstairs. Take the private elevator. Key card works for it." Lena grabbed the black credit card Alessio had given her and the key card and headed for the door. The hallway was empty, just expensive carpet and recessed lighting, but she spotted an elevator at the far end with a discreet card reader beside it. The key card beeped green when she swiped it. The elevator descended smoothly, bypassing all the regular floors and opening directly into an underground garage. The same female driver from last night was waiting beside a different car, still black, still expensive, but a sedan instead of an SUV. "Morning," the driver said, opening the back door. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," Lena lied, climbing in. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." They drove through morning traffic in silence. Lena watched the city scroll past, trying to orient herself, but the driver took enough turns that she quickly lost track. They ended up in a part of town Lena didn't recognize. Industrial buildings mixed with newer construction. The kind of neighborhood that was either gentrifying or dying, depending on who you asked. The car pulled into a parking lot behind a nondescript brick building. The driver led Lena through a steel door that required a code, down a hallway that smelled like concrete and oil, and finally into a large open space that looked like it had once been a warehouse. Alessio was waiting in the center of the room, dressed in dark pants and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The casual look should have made him seem more approachable. It didn't. If anything, he looked more dangerous without the suit, like he'd stripped down to something essential and violent. "Good morning," he said as Lena approached. "How did you sleep?" Like someone who made a potentially catastrophic decision and is trying not to think about it. His mouth quirked. "Honest. I appreciate that." He gestured around the warehouse space. "This is one of my training facilities. Legitimate business, mostly. I run a security consulting firm that trains bodyguards and private contractors. But today, we're using it for something different." Lena looked around, noticing the equipment scattered throughout the space. Punching bags, weight racks, what looked like a small boxing ring in one corner. "You're going to teach me to fight?" "Eventually, but first I'm going to teach you not to flinch." He moved closer, his pale eyes assessing her with clinical precision. "You've spent 3 years making yourself smaller, learning to anticipate violence and avoid it. That instinct kept you safe, but it also kept you weak. If you want real power, you need to unlearn submission. The words landed like slaps. Lena felt her jaw tighten, felt the familiar urge to apologize or deflect. But that was exactly what he was talking about, wasn't it? The automatic reflex to make herself smaller. How do I do that? She asked instead. By learning what you're capable of. Alessio walked to a nearby table and picked up what looked like a small knife in a leather sheath. He held it out to her. Take this. Lena stared at the weapon. Why? Because I'm going to teach you how to use it. Not for offense, not yet, but so you understand that you don't have to be defenseless. He pressed the sheath into her hand. The knowledge that you could hurt someone if you needed to, that changes how you move through the world. Lena unsheathed the knife slowly. The blade was maybe 4 inches long, wickedly sharp, the metal catching the warehouse's fluorescent lights. She'd never held a weapon before. It felt alien in her palm, heavy with potential. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said quietly. That's because you're a good person. But good people get destroyed by bad ones unless they learn to defend themselves. Alessio moved behind her, his hand closing over hers on the knife handle. Here's the first lesson. Feel the weight of it. Get comfortable with the idea that this piece of metal could save your life. His body was warm against her back, his breath stirring her hair. Lena's pulse kicked up, and she wasn't entirely sure if it was fear or something else entirely. He guided her hand through a basic defensive motion, showing her how to hold the blade properly, how to keep her wrist locked. Someone grabs you, he said, his voice low near her ear. You don't think, you react. Muscle memory takes over, but you have to build that memory first. They practiced the movement over and over, a quick slash across the body, designed to make an attacker release their grip. Alessio's hand stayed on hers for the first dozen repetitions, correcting her angle, adjusting her stance. Then he stepped back and made her do it alone. Lena's arm started to ache after the 50th repetition. After 100, she was sweating through the cashmere sweater. But Alessio didn't let her stop until the movement looked smooth, instinctive. Good, he said finally. Now you're going to practice on me. Lena's eyes widened. What? I'm going to grab your wrist the way Victor did. You're going to use what I taught you to make me let go. He rolled his shoulders, loosening them. Don't worry, I'm expecting it, so you won't actually hurt me, but I need you to commit to the motion. Alessio, I don't think... Stop thinking. His hand shot out and caught her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. React. Lena froze. The sensation of being held triggered something visceral, dragged her back to the corridor outside the ballroom with Victor's fingers digging into her skin. She could smell Alessio's cologne, could feel his pulse against her wrist, and every instinct screamed at her to submit, to go still and small and unthreatening. Lena! Alessio's voice cut through the panic. Look at me. She forced her eyes up to his face. He wasn't smiling, wasn't mocking, just watching her with patient intensity. You're not there anymore, he said quietly. You're here, with someone who won't hurt you unless you ask me to. But you need to break this freeze response, so move. Lena's hand tightened on the knife handle. She tried to remember the motion he'd taught her, tried to make her body cooperate, but she was locked up, trembling with adrenaline and old fear. I can't, she whispered. You can. Alessio's grip tightened slightly, just enough to remind her she was being held. I'm not letting go until you make me, so you can stand here all day, or you can fight. Something in Lena snapped. She didn't think, didn't plan, just moved, slashing the training knife across her body the way he'd shown her. The blade didn't touch him, but the motion was enough. Alessio released her wrist immediately and stepped back, satisfaction crossing his features. Again, he said. They repeated the exercise 20 times, then 30. Each time, Alessio's grip got firmer, his hold lasting a fraction longer, until Lena's response became automatic. By the time he finally called a break, she was shaking with exhaustion and something that felt dangerously close to exhilaration. Water, Alessio said, tossing her a bottle from a nearby cooler. Drink. Then we talk about Victor. Lena's hands were unsteady as she unscrewed the cap and drank. Her wrist ached where Alessio had been gripping it, but it was a clean ache, nothing like the bruises Victor had left. She collapsed onto a bench near the boxing ring and waited for her breathing to even out. Alessio sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. How do you feel? Like I just got my ass kicked by a 4-inch knife in my own fear. He laughed, the sound unexpected and genuine. Fair assessment. But you didn't quit. That's what matters. What happens now? Lena took another drink of water. You said we'd talk about Victor. We will. But first you need to understand what you're agreeing to. Alessio's expression sobered. I had someone pay Victor a visit this morning. Nothing dramatic, just a conversation about respect and consequences. He knows now that you're under my protection and that touching you again would be a mistake. Lena's stomach flipped. What kind of conversation? The kind where my associate explained that bruising women is unacceptable behavior and that continuing such behavior would result in complications for Hale Industries. Alessio's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. Victor is a businessman. He understands incentives. He won't touch you again. That's it? You just scared him? For now. But if you want more, if you want him to truly regret what he did to you, that requires a different approach. Alessio turned to face her fully. I can destroy Victor Hale's life, Lena. I can dismantle his business, ruin his reputation, make him understand exactly what it feels like to be powerless. But that kind of revenge takes time and commitment, and it means you becoming someone different than who you were yesterday. The warehouse suddenly felt very quiet. Lena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the training knife still tucked in her pocket. Someone different how? She asked. Someone who exists in my world, someone protected, educated, powerful. Someone Victor can't ignore or erase. Alessio paused. It means accepting my help, living under my roof, learning everything I can teach you about how power really works in this city. You want me to move in with you? I want you to let me rebuild you into someone who never has to be afraid again. His pale eyes held hers. But I won't lie to you, Lena. The world I live in is dangerous. People who get close to me become targets. Enemies use the people I care about as leverage. If you do this, you're accepting that risk. Lena thought about her tiny apartment with Maya, her dead-end serving job, the 3 years she'd wasted on a man who'd called her a distraction. She thought about last night, standing in the ballroom soaked in champagne while 200 people laughed. She thought about the bruises on her wrist and the way Victor had looked through her like she was furniture. What would I have to do? She asked quietly. Specifically, move into my home. Let me teach you how to protect yourself, how to read people, how to navigate power structures. I'll pay for your education, whatever you want to study, whatever interests you. You'll learn my business, meet my associates, understand how this city really operates underneath all the polite pretense. Alessio's voice was calm, laying out the terms like a contract. In exchange, you stay close. You're loyal. You don't betray my trust or compromise my operations, and you accept that when I introduce you to people, you're representing me. So I'd be what exactly? Your employee? Your student? You'd be under my protection. The specifics we can define as we go. His mouth curved slightly. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not comfortable with, Lena, but I am asking you to trust me with your transformation. It was insane. Completely insane. Moving in with a man she'd met less than 24 hours ago, a man who casually sent people to threaten her ex-boyfriend, a man who ran weapons or drugs or whatever the hell he actually did when he wasn't training people to use knives in abandoned warehouses. But the alternative was going back to her old life. Finding another serving job, living with Maya, who didn't really know her, starting over from nothing while Victor married Catherine and forgot Lena had ever existed. If I say yes, Lena said slowly, and I change my mind later, if I want out, what happens? You tell me. I make arrangements for your safety and you leave. No retribution, no threats. Alessio leaned back against the wall behind the bench. I told you last night I don't deal in coercion. This only works if you choose it freely. Lena closed her eyes and tried to imagine her future. Both versions. The one where she walked away from this and the one where she stayed. Walking away meant safety, probably. Meant normal problems and ordinary struggles and never having to wonder if the man protecting her was also the most dangerous thing in her life. Staying meant power. Meant learning to fight back. Meant Victor Hale looking at her someday and realizing she wasn't nobody important after all. She opened her eyes and found Alessio watching her with that patient, predatory focus that made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it." "I want to know exactly what you do, the truth, all of it. Because if I'm going to live in your world, I need to understand what I'm part of." Alessio was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I run multiple businesses in this city. Some are completely legitimate: security consulting, property management, investments. Some operate in gray areas. I facilitate transactions between people who can't use traditional banking. I provide protection services that aren't exactly legal. I move goods that customs doesn't need to know about. And some of what I do is flatly criminal. I control territories, I eliminate competition, I make problems disappear for people who can afford my rates." The honesty was almost shocking. Lena had expected evasion or euphemism, not this blunt catalog of crimes. "You're telling me this because you think I won't turn you in," she said. "I'm telling you this because you asked for the truth, and because if you're going to be part of my life, you need to understand what that means." Alessio's expression didn't change. "Also, yes, I know you won't turn me in. You're too smart to make an enemy of me, and too loyal to betray someone who's helping you. You don't know that I'm loyal. You spent 3 years loyal to a man who treated you like garbage. Imagine what you could do with that loyalty if it was actually valued." He stood, offering her his hand. "So what's your answer, Lena Hart? Do you trust me enough to let me rebuild you?" Lena stared at his outstretched hand. This was the moment, the point of no return. Everything after this would be different, dangerous, possibly destructive. But she was so tired of being afraid, so tired of being small. She reached up and took his hand. "Yes." Alessio's fingers closed around hers, warm and certain. He pulled her to her feet with easy strength, and for just a moment they stood there, his hand still holding hers, his pale eyes searching her face. "Good," he said quietly. "Then let's begin." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of instruction. Alessio taught her basic self-defense moves, how to break different types of holds, where to strike to disable an attacker. He was patient but demanding, correcting her form over and over until her muscles screamed. By noon, Lena was exhausted, bruised from falling on the mats, and more alert than she'd been in years. They broke for lunch in a small office attached to the warehouse. Someone had brought food, sandwiches from a deli, fresh fruit, coffee that was significantly better than the stuff at the Ashford had ever been. Lena ate mechanically, too tired to taste anything. "This afternoon I want to show you something," Alessio said, watching her over his coffee cup. "Something that will help you understand the scope of what I'm offering." "What kind of something?" "A business meeting. Nothing dangerous, just a negotiation with some people who want to use my services. You'll observe. Learn how power gets negotiated in rooms that don't have contracts or lawyers." Lena's exhaustion was making her reckless. "Will there be weapons involved?" "Probably not. These are civilized people. They prefer money to violence." Alessio's smile was sharp. "Usually." The meeting happened in a restaurant Lena had walked past 100 times but never entered. The kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu and required reservations weeks in advance. Alessio's driver took them there directly from the warehouse, and Lena became acutely aware that she was still wearing the clothes from this morning, now wrinkled and sweat-stained from training. "Don't worry about it," Alessio said, reading her expression. "You're with me. That's all the dress code you need." Inside, the restaurant was all dark wood and leather booths, the lighting low enough to suggest intimacy or secrecy depending on your perspective. The hostess recognized Alessio immediately and led them to a private room in the back without being asked. 3 men were already seated at the table, older, expensive suits, the kind of calculated casual that came from having nothing to prove. They stood when Alessio entered, respect or fear making them defer immediately. "Gentlemen," Alessio said, gesturing for them to sit. "This is Lena. She's observing today." None of them questioned it. They just nodded and settled back into their seats, their eyes sliding over Lena and dismissing her as quickly as they'd registered her presence. She was used to that reaction, but for the first time it felt strategic rather than painful. Invisible meant she could watch without being watched. The negotiation was fascinating in its efficiency. The 3 men wanted Alessio to provide security for a shipment coming through the port, something valuable enough that they were willing to pay 20% of its worth for safe passage. They didn't specify what the shipment was. Alessio didn't ask. 20% is reasonable, Alessio said after they'd laid out the terms. But I'll need assurances that your people won't create complications. The Port Authority has been aggressive lately. If your shipment draws attention, it becomes my problem. Our people are discreet, the oldest of the three men said. He had silver hair and a signet ring that caught the light. We've used this route before without incident. Then you don't need my services. The man's jaw tightened. The political situation has changed. We need insurance. Insurance costs more than 20%. Alessio leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. 25, and I guarantee safe passage. Anything less, and you're taking your chances with the current Port Authority administration. They haggled for another 10 minutes, but Lena could see the outcome was never in doubt. Alessio had them from the moment he'd named his price, and they knew it. They agreed to 24% and a timeline, shook hands without signing anything, and left looking like they'd gotten exactly what they'd wanted. When they were gone, Alessio turned to Lena. What did you observe? You barely negotiated. They came in at 20, you countered at 25, you settled at 24. That's not really haggling. No, it's establishing value. They needed to feel like they won something, so I let them negotiate down 1%. But they came here willing to pay 25. I could see it in how quickly they folded. Alessio's smile was satisfied. Power isn't about getting everything you want. It's about knowing what the other person needs and making them grateful when you provide it. What was in the shipment? Does it matter? Lena thought about that. I guess not. You're just providing a service. Exactly. I don't judge what people move through my city. I just make sure it moves safely. He stood, offering his hand again. Come on. I want to show you where you'll be living. The car took them to a different neighborhood, one Lena recognized as seriously wealthy. Tree-lined streets, historic homes set back from the road. The kind of quiet that came from money and privacy. They pulled up to a wrought iron gate that opened automatically, revealing a circular driveway and a house that looked more like something from a movie than real life. This is yours? Lena asked, staring at the stone facade and tall windows. This is home. Alessio climbed out of the car and waited for her to follow. Built in 1924, renovated 2 years ago. 6 bedrooms, library, gym, pool, security system that could stop a small army. You'll have your own suite on the 2nd floor. The inside was even more impressive. High ceilings, original molding, art that Lena was pretty sure was real and expensive. But it didn't feel sterile like some wealthy homes she'd seen. There were books scattered on tables, a jacket thrown over a chair, evidence of actual living mixed in with the obvious luxury. Alessio led her upstairs to a bedroom suite that was bigger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a garden. A king-sized bed dominated one wall. The attached bathroom had both a soaking tub and a shower that could fit 3 people. This is temporary, Alessio said, watching her take it in. If you stay, we can redecorate. Make it yours. Lena turned to face him. If I stay here, people will assume things. Let them. He moved closer, and Lena found herself backed against one of the tall windows. I'm not concerned with what people think. But if you're asking whether I expect something physical in exchange for this, the answer is no. What happens between us is separate from our arrangement. If something develops, it's because we both want it. Not because you owe me. He was close enough now that Lena could feel the heat radiating off him, could see the silver flecks in his pale eyes. Her pulse kicked up again, that same confusion of fear and something darker that she didn't want to name. What if nothing develops? She asked quietly. Then nothing develops. You still get everything I promised. Education, protection, power. Your transformation doesn't depend on sleeping with me, Lena. His mouth curved slightly. Though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping you'd choose to eventually. The honesty was disarming. Lena had spent 3 years with Victor parsing every word for hidden meaning, trying to figure out what he really wanted versus what he was willing to admit. Alessio just said it plainly, like desire was nothing to be ashamed of. I need time, she said, to process all this, to figure out what I actually want versus what I think I should want. Take all the time you need. Alessio stepped back, giving her space. Your things will be delivered tomorrow. Until then, there's a closet full of clothes that should fit. My housekeeper will show you around, help you settle in. Tonight, we eat dinner together, and you ask me anything you want to know. No secrets, no evasion, just honesty. Anything? Anything. He headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Lena? Victor Hale received a detailed accounting of his mistakes today. By tomorrow, he'll understand that hurting you was the worst business decision he ever made. So if you want to watch him squirm, I can arrange that. Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone in a bedroom suite that cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime, surrounded by luxury she'd never dreamed of possessing, and trying to figure out exactly what she'd agreed to. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, not Alessio's, someone new. This is Diana, Mr. Moretti's housekeeper. Dinner's at 7. Dress code is comfortable. Welcome home. Welcome home. Like this place could ever really be home. Like Lena Hart, former waitress and professional disappointment, belonged in a house with 6 bedrooms and original artwork. But maybe that was the point. Maybe belonging wasn't about deserving it. Maybe it was about deciding you were worth it and refusing to accept anything less. Lena walked to the window and looked out at the garden, at the city beyond it, at the world she'd just agreed to enter. Somewhere out there, Victor was probably just getting the message that consequences were real, that the woman he'd brutalized and humiliated had found someone more dangerous than him to be protected by. The thought made her smile for the first time in 24 hours. Lena lasted 3 weeks before the first real test came. 3 weeks of living in Alessio's house, training every morning until her muscles screamed, sitting in on business meetings where men twice her age deferred to a word from Alessio like it was gospel. 3 weeks of learning that power wasn't loud or aggressive, it was quiet certainty, the ability to walk into any room and know you belonged there more than anyone else. Diana, the housekeeper, was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an efficiency that bordered on psychic. She seemed to know what Lena needed before Lena knew herself. Coffee appearing exactly when exhaustion hit, meals timed perfectly after training sessions, clothes laid out that somehow always fit the day's agenda. She didn't ask questions about why a former waitress was suddenly living in Alessio's home. She just made sure Lena had everything she needed and disappeared like smoke when she wasn't required. The house itself was easier to adjust to than Lena expected. Yes, it was massive and expensive and filled with things she was afraid to touch. But it was also lived in, comfortable in a way that suggested Alessio actually used the space rather than just existing in it. Books everywhere. Fiction mixed with philosophy, mixed with detailed histories of organized crime that Lena found both fascinating and terrifying. A kitchen that saw real use, not just catered events. A gym in the basement where Alessio worked out every morning at 5:30. His routine so precise, Lena could set her watch by it. She started joining him on the 4th day. Not because he asked, but because lying in bed while he was up felt like wasting time she didn't have. He didn't comment on her presence, just adjusted his workout to include teaching her proper form on the weights, how to build the kind of strength that wasn't about size but about efficiency. They fell into a rhythm, training before dawn, breakfast together while reading separate sections of the newspaper, Lena studying business courses online while Alessio worked from his home office. Lunch was usually when he took calls or had visitors, associates, clients, people who needed things only Alessio could provide. Lena observed from the margins, learning to read the power dynamics and how people sat, how they spoke, who deferred to whom. Evenings were hers to do what she wanted, though she usually ended up in the library reading or watching Alessio work through contracts and ledgers with the focus of someone solving complex equations. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. It was the strangest domesticity Lena had ever experienced. Living with a man who could order someone's death before breakfast and spend the evening debating whether Hemingway or Fitzgerald was the better prose stylist. Victor's world imploded gradually, then all at once. Alessio showed her the reports like they were theater reviews, pointing out the particularly elegant pieces of destruction with evident satisfaction. Hale Industries lost 3 major contracts in the first week. Companies that decided doing business with Victor was suddenly too risky. The engagement party disaster made the society pages, complete with speculation about family tensions and questions about Victor's judgment. Catherine Westbrook's father started making noises about reconsidering the merger. He's scrambling, Alessio said one evening, passing Lena his tablet with an email chain pulled up. Trying to figure out who's moving against him and why. He suspects business rivals. He has no idea it's personal. Lena read through the emails. Victor's increasingly frantic messages to his father, to business partners, to anyone who might explain why his carefully constructed future was crumbling. There was something both satisfying and hollow about watching it happen from a distance. Does he know it's because of me? She asked. He knows someone cares about what he did to you. He doesn't know that someone has the power to dismantle his entire life. Alessio reclaimed the tablet. The uncertainty is worse than knowing. It's making him paranoid, erratic, bad for business. Good, Lena said, and meant it. But 3 weeks in, the abstract revenge became concrete in a way that changed everything. It started with a text from an unknown number while Lena was reading in the library. Just an address and a time. 8 p.m. Come alone. You want to see this? She should have told Alessio immediately. Should have shown him the message and let him handle it. But something stopped her. Pride, maybe, or the desire to prove she could navigate this world without constant protection. She'd been training for 3 weeks. She knew how to defend herself now. She could handle a mysterious meeting. The address was in a part of the city Lena didn't know well. Industrial buildings giving way to abandoned warehouses near the water. She took a rideshare, got dropped off 2 blocks away, and walked the rest. The November cold bit through her jacket, and the street was dark enough that she had to use her phone's flashlight to avoid tripping. The building matched the address, a warehouse with broken windows and a door hanging off its hinges. Every instinct Lena had developed over 3 weeks of training screamed at her to turn around. But she could hear voices inside, muffled but distinct, and curiosity overrode caution. She slipped through the door as quietly as possible and found herself in a vast empty space lit by a single work light. 2 men stood in the center, their backs to her, and between them, on his knees with his hands zip-tied behind his back, was Victor Hale. Lena's breath stopped. Victor's face was a mess, split lip, eyes swelling shut, blood dripping from his nose onto his expensive suit. He was shaking, whether from cold or fear Lena couldn't tell, and when he spoke his voice cracked with desperation. "I don't know what you want," he was saying. "I'll pay whatever. Just tell me what this is about." One of the men, the linebacker from the alley behind the Ashford, laughed. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about money." "Then what?" Victor's voice climbed higher. "What did I do?" "You hurt someone who matters to someone who matters." The linebacker circled Victor slowly. "You put your hands on a woman and thought there wouldn't be consequences. You humiliated her in front of 200 people and thought you could just walk away." Understanding dawned on Victor's battered face. "Lena? This is about Lena?" He actually laughed. The sound edged with hysteria. "She's nobody. She was just—" The linebacker's fist connected with Victor's jaw, snapping his head to the side. Victor crumpled, nearly falling before catching himself. Blood sprayed across the concrete. "She's not nobody," the linebacker said calmly. "She's under Mr. Moretti's protection, and you're going to learn exactly what that means." Lena stood frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering so hard she thought they might hear it. This was wrong. This wasn't what she'd wanted. Watching Victor's business crumble was one thing. Seeing him beaten and terrified was something else entirely. She should leave. Should back out of the warehouse and pretend she'd never seen this. But her feet wouldn't move, and some horrible part of her couldn't look away from Victor on his knees, finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless. The second man pulled out a knife, not a training blade like Alessio had given her, but something serious and cruel. Victor saw it and made a sound that wasn't quite a scream. "Please," he begged. "I'm sorry. I'll apologize to her. I'll do whatever—" Too late for apologies. The linebacker nodded to his partner. Mr. Moretti was very specific about the message. The man with the knife moved forward, and Lena heard herself shout, "Stop!" before her brain caught up with her mouth. 3 heads swiveled toward her. The linebacker's expression went from businesslike to alarmed in an instant. Victor's eyes went wide, hope and horror mixing on his bloody face. "Lena," he gasped. Shut up." Lena walked forward on shaking legs, trying to project a confidence she absolutely did not feel. "Put the knife away." The man with the knife looked at the linebacker, uncertain. The linebacker pulled out his phone and stepped away, speaking in low, urgent tones. Lena caught the words problem and she's here before he moved out of earshot. She stopped a few feet from Victor, looking down at him. 3 weeks ago, she'd loved this man, had believed he was her future. Now, staring at his ruined face and zip-tied hands, all she felt was a cold, distant pity. "You look terrible," she said quietly. Victor's laugh was broken. "You did this. You're with Moretti. That's why. Everything that's happened, it's you." "It's you," Lena corrected. "You did this to yourself when you decided I didn't matter, when you grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise and told me I was pathetic, when you humiliated me in front of everyone and expected no consequences." "I'm sorry." Victor's voice cracked. "I was wrong. I treated you badly. But this, Lena, they were going to kill me." "I know." Lena crouched down to his eye level. "And part of me thinks you deserve it. Part of me wants to watch them do it and not feel anything. But I'm not that person yet." "Yet?" Victor's good eye widened. "What has he done to you?" Before Lena could answer, the warehouse door slammed open and Alessio strode in with 4 men behind him. His face was carved from ice, his pale eyes landing on Lena with an intensity that made her stomach drop. "Get her out of here," he said to one of his men, his voice flat and dangerous. "No." Lena stood, putting herself between Alessio and Victor. "Not until we talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about." Alessio moved closer, and Lena could feel the controlled rage radiating off him. "You came here alone without telling me and put yourself in danger. Do you have any idea how reckless that was?" "I can handle myself." "Against what?" "2 of my men who weren't expecting you. What if this had been a trap? What if someone else knew you'd be here?" His voice didn't rise, but somehow got colder, sharper. "You don't get to take risks like this. Not when your safety is my responsibility." Lena's temper flared. "I'm not your property. I don't need permission to go where I want." "Well, when where you want is a warehouse where someone's being interrogated, yes, you do." Alessio's jaw was so tight, Lena could see the muscle jumping. "Get in the car, now." "What happens to him?" Lena gestured to Victor. "That's not your concern anymore." "It is if you're doing this because of me." Lena held her ground, even though every instinct said backing down from Alessio in this mood was the smart play. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want him beaten or threatened or whatever you were planning to do with that knife." Alessio's eyes flicked to the linebacker, who suddenly looked very interested in the floor. "You were following my orders." "I know, but I'm telling you now, I want this stopped. No more. He's suffered enough." "He put his hands on you." Alessio's voice dropped to something lethal. "He bruised you, humiliated you, threw you away like garbage. And you think a few hits and some fear is enough consequence?" "I think I don't want blood on my hands." Lena's shout echoed in the warehouse. "I wanted his business ruined. I wanted him to understand what he did was wrong. I didn't want him dead in a warehouse because of me." Silence fell, heavy and thick. Victor was crying now, quiet, desperate sobs that made Lena's chest ache with complicated emotions she didn't want to examine. Alessio stared at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between fury and reassessment. Finally, he turned to the linebacker. "Cut him loose. Take him to a hospital. Make sure he understands that if he speaks about this to anyone, police, press, his father, the consequences will be significantly worse than a beating." The linebacker moved immediately, cutting Victor's zip ties and hauling him to his feet. Victor nearly collapsed, his legs unable to hold him. He looked at Lena one last time, his ruined face full of something that might have been gratitude or accusation, or both. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything. You deserved better." Lena said nothing. There was nothing to say. Victor was half carried out of the warehouse by 2 of Alessio's men, leaving her alone with Alessio, and a tension so thick she could barely breathe. "Get in the car," Alessio said again, his voice carefully controlled. "We're not doing this here." This time, Lena didn't argue. She followed him out to the black SUV and climbed in the back. The ride back to his house was silent, Alessio staring out the window with his jaw clenched, and Lena trying to figure out whether she'd just made a terrible mistake. When they got home, Alessio headed straight for his office. Lena followed, not willing to let this sit and fester. He poured himself scotch, drained it in one swallow, and poured another before finally turning to face her. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he asked quietly. "I stopped something I didn't want to happen. You undermined my authority in front of my men. You showed up at a location you weren't supposed to know about and countermanded my orders." He set the glass down hard enough that Lena was surprised it didn't shatter. "Do you understand how that makes me look? How it makes you look?" "I don't care how it makes me look." "Well, you should, because in my world, showing weakness gets you killed, showing sentiment gets you exploited, and showing up to save someone who hurt you makes people think you can be manipulated through guilt or emotion." Alessio moved closer, and Lena forced herself not to step back. "I was handling Victor, my way, the way that ensures he never touches another woman without thinking about consequences. By killing him? By making him understand that certain actions have permanent ramifications." Alessio's pale eyes bored into hers. "But you stopped that. So now Victor walks away thinking that if he cries and begs, Lena Hart will save him, that her compassion is a weakness he can use." The words landed like slaps. Lena felt her face flush with anger and shame in equal measure. "I'm not weak for not wanting someone dead because of me." "I didn't say you were weak. I said you showed weakness. There's a difference." Alessio rubbed his face, exhaustion showing through the anger. "You can't have it both ways, Lena. You can't want power and protection and revenge, and then flinch when what that actually looks like gets ugly." "So what? I'm supposed to become someone who watches people get hurt and feels nothing, just turn off my conscience and accept that violence is the answer to everything?" "I'm saying you need to decide who you want to be, because the version of you that lives in my house, learns my business, benefits from my protection, that version doesn't get to play innocent when the reality of what I do becomes inconvenient." His voice gentled slightly. "I'm not asking you to become cruel, Lena, but I am asking you to be honest about what you signed up for." Lena sank into one of the leather chairs near his desk, her anger draining into something more complicated. He was right, and she hated that he was right. She'd wanted Victor punished but hadn't thought through what that punishment would actually look like. Had wanted to exist in Alessio's world without confronting what that world actually was. "I got a text," she said quietly. "Someone told me where to go and when. I don't know what I thought. That maybe it was a test or a chance to prove I could handle myself." Alessio went very still. "Show me." Lena pulled out her phone and handed it to him. He examined the message, his expression darkening with each second. "This isn't from anyone who works for me," he said finally, "which means someone else knew about Victor's interrogation and wanted you there to see it. Wanted you to interfere." Cold dread pooled in Lena's stomach. "Why?" "To test your loyalty. To see if you'd choose me or your conscience. To create exactly the kind of division between us that we're having right now." Alessio pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Marco, I need you to trace a number, high priority." He rattled off the number from Lena's phone, then hung up and looked at her with an expression that mixed concern with calculation. "Someone's watching you," he said. "Someone who knows enough about my operations to know when and where Victor was being held. That's a serious problem." Lena's hands started shaking. "You think someone's targeting me?" "I think someone's testing whether you're a weakness they can exploit. And tonight, you proved that you might be." Alessio crouched in front of her chair, his hands on the armrests, caging her in without touching her. "I need you to be honest with me. Do you regret stopping what was happening to Victor?" Lena thought about it carefully. About Victor on his knees, terrified and bleeding. About the knife and the linebacker's cold efficiency. About how it had felt to watch the man she'd loved for 3 years reduced to begging. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. But I understand now that it was stupid, that someone used my compassion to create a problem for you." "For us," Alessio corrected. "We're in this together now. Your problems are my problems. Your safety is my priority." His voice dropped lower. "But I can't protect you if you don't trust me, if you keep making decisions like tonight without telling me." "I know. I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough." He stood, pulling her up with him. "You need to understand something, Lena. The people in my world, they don't play fair, they don't give second chances, they find weaknesses and exploit them until there's nothing left. If they think you're my weakness, they'll use you to hurt me, and I can't let that happen. So what do? We find out who sent that text, we eliminate them, and we make sure everyone understands that touching you is the last mistake they'll ever make. Alessio's hands tightened on her shoulders. But you have to promise me no more lone missions, no more mysterious texts you follow without backup. If something feels off, you tell me, immediately. I promise. Say it like you mean it. Lena looked into his pale eyes and saw the genuine fear underneath the anger. Not fear for himself, but fear for her. The realization hit like a physical blow. Alessio Moretti, the man who scared seasoned criminals, was terrified something would happen to her. I promise, she said again, putting every ounce of sincerity she had into the words. No more taking stupid risks. No more going places without telling you. I'll be careful. Something in his expression eased slightly. He pulled her closer, and for a moment Lena thought he might kiss her. But instead he just rested his forehead against hers, breathing like he'd been running. You're going to be the death of me, he muttered. I thought you were supposed to be the dangerous one. I am, which is why I know exactly how many ways this could go wrong. He stepped back, putting professional distance between them again. Go get some sleep. Tomorrow we start tracking whoever sent that text. And Lena, from now on, you don't go anywhere without security. Not negotiable. She wanted to argue, but the fear in his eyes stopped her. Okay. Lena headed upstairs to her suite, her mind racing. She'd thought she understood what living in Alessio's world meant, thought she'd prepared herself for the reality of violence and power plays and moral ambiguity. But tonight had shown her how naive she'd been. This wasn't a game or a story where the consequences stayed safely abstract. This was real people getting hurt because of choices she made. She pulled out her phone to check the mysterious text again and found a new message waiting. You showed mercy tonight. That's admirable. But mercy is weakness in Alessio Moretti's world. How long before he realizes you're not cut out for this life? Lena's blood went cold. She screenshot the message and sent it to Alessio immediately, then deleted both texts and threw her phone on the bed like it was poisonous. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew what happened in that warehouse and knew enough about her to push exactly the right buttons. And they were right about one thing. She'd shown mercy. Had stopped something brutal because she couldn't stomach the reality of revenge. But as Lena stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, at the woman who'd lived in Alessio's house for 3 weeks and learned to fight and observe and move through rooms of powerful men without flinching, she realized something else too. She wasn't the same person who'd dropped that champagne tray. Wasn't the same woman who'd loved Victor Hale and believed patience would be rewarded. 3 weeks with Alessio had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The question was whether she could change enough to survive what was coming. Because someone out there had decided she was a liability worth testing, and in Alessio's world that kind of attention was usually fatal. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alessio. Security detail starts tomorrow, everywhere you go. And Lena? Thank you for telling me about the second message. That's trust. We'll build on it. Lena climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere downstairs, Alessio was probably working through the night trying to find whoever had sent those texts, trying to eliminate a threat before it became lethal. And Lena was lying in a bedroom that still didn't quite feel like hers, in a house that represented a life she'd never imagined, protected by a man who terrified her and fascinated her in equal measure. 3 weeks ago, she'd been nobody important. Now she was somebody important enough to be worth targeting. She wasn't sure which was more dangerous. The security detail turned out to be a woman named Rachel who looked like she could bench press a car and had the personality of sandpaper. She appeared at breakfast the next morning, introduced herself with a nod, and took up position near the door like a particularly intimidating piece of furniture. She goes everywhere with you, Alessio said, not looking up from his newspaper. Bathroom breaks accepted. I'm right here, Lena pointed out. You can talk to me directly. I'm aware. Rachel, Lena is stubborn and has terrible survival instincts. Don't let her out of your sight. Rachel's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. Hard to tell. Lena spent the morning in the library working through a business finance course online while Rachel sat in the corner reading something on her phone. It should have felt oppressive, being watched constantly. But Rachel had a gift for being present without being intrusive. After an hour, Lena almost forgot she was there. Almost. Her phone buzzed around 11. A text from Maya. Okay, seriously, where are you? Your stuff is still here, but you haven't been back in a month. Should I be worried, or did you finally snap and join a cult? Lena stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain the unexplainable. Finally, she typed, Not a cult. Long story. I'm safe. I'll come get my stuff soon, I promise. Maya's response was immediate. You better. And you're buying me drinks when you explain what long story means because I have theories and they're all insane. Lena smiled despite everything. Maya was probably the closest thing to a friend she had left, which said a lot about how isolated she'd become during the Victor years. She made a mental note to actually follow through on drinks and explanations, assuming she survived whatever was coming. Alessio appeared in the library doorway just before noon, his expression grim. We need to talk. Conference room. Now. Rachel stood immediately, hand moving to her jacket where Lena knew she kept a weapon. The casual readiness was both reassuring and terrifying. The conference room was on the first floor, a sleek space with a table that could seat 12 and windows overlooking the garden. 3 men were already there when Lena arrived. The linebacker from the warehouse, a thin man with glasses who looked more accountant than criminal, and someone Lena didn't recognize, older and radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of command. Lena, this is Marco, Alessio said, gesturing to the linebacker. You've met. This is Steven, my financial analyst. And this is Antonio Russo. He runs operations in the Eastern District. Antonio's handshake was firm, his eyes assessing. Miss Hart, I've heard interesting things about you. Probably all true, Lena said, trying to match his tone. Alessio gestured for everyone to sit. Stephen traced the texts. Show her. The analyst pulled up something on his laptop and turned the screen toward Lena. The number was a burner, but whoever used it wasn't particularly careful. They activated it from a location we've tracked back to a building owned by Westbrook Properties. Lena's stomach dropped. Catherine's father? Or someone working for him? Alessio's expression was carved ice. The question is whether this is personal retaliation, Catherine finding out about you and Victor, or something more strategic. Antonio leaned back in his chair. The Westbrooks have been making moves in territory adjacent to yours for 6 months. Nothing overt, but enough that we've been watching. Using Victor's ex-girlfriend to create problems for you, that's the kind of indirect approach they favor. So this isn't about me at all, Lena said slowly. I'm just a convenient tool. Your leverage, Alessio's voice was tight. They see you as my weakness, something they can exploit to distract me or force mistakes. Lena thought about the text messages, the timing, the way someone had known exactly how to push her buttons. What do they want? My territory, my shipping routes, my connections. Alessio stood and moved to the window, his back to the room. Thomas Westbrook has been trying to expand his operations for years. I've blocked him at every turn. Using his daughter's engagement to Victor was supposed to give them access to Hale Industries' resources. When that started falling apart, thanks to our interventions, they needed a new angle. And that angle is me. Lena tried to keep the bitterness out of her voice. Failed. So what? They're hoping you'll be so busy protecting me that you'll leave openings elsewhere? That's part of it. The other part is reputation. Antonio's voice was matter of fact. If word gets out that Alessio Moretti's woman was used to manipulate him, it makes him look weak, makes people think he's vulnerable through emotional attachment. I'm not his woman, Lena said automatically. The room went very quiet. Alessio turned from the window, his pale eyes finding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Aren't you? He asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, and she was suddenly aware that everyone in the room was watching this exchange with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. We should discuss this later, she managed. No, we should discuss it now. Alessio moved back to the table but didn't sit. Because if you're just someone living in my house temporarily, someone I'm helping out of charity or obligation, then the Westbrooks are wrong about the leverage. But if you're more than that, if what we have is something I'd protect even when it's strategically stupid, then they're right, and we need to account for that in our planning. Lena felt her face flush. You're asking me to define our relationship in front of 3 of your associates during a security briefing? I'm asking you to be honest, with them and with yourself. His voice gentled slightly. Because the way we respond to this threat depends on what you mean to me, and I can't make that call without knowing where you stand. It was possibly the worst time and place for this conversation, but Alessio was right. They couldn't strategize effectively if everyone was pretending the elephant in the room didn't exist. Lena took a breath and met his eyes. I don't know what we are, but I know I'm not here just for protection anymore. I'm here because when I think about leaving, about going back to my old life, it feels wrong, like trying to wear clothes that don't fit anymore. She paused. So if that makes me leverage the Westbrooks can use, then yes, they're right. Something flickered in Alessio's expression. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief. He nodded once and turned back to the others. Then we proceed on the assumption that Lena is a known vulnerability and plan accordingly. Marco cleared his throat. With respect, boss, maybe the easier solution is to eliminate the vulnerability. Lena's blood went cold. Rachel's hand moved to her weapon. But Alessio just laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. If you're suggesting I remove Lena from the equation, Marco, I'd recommend choosing your next words very carefully. Marco held up both hands. I meant remove her from their access. Send her somewhere they can't reach, temporarily, until we handle the Westbrook situation. No. Lena surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. I'm not running and hiding while you fight my battles. This isn't your battle, Antonio said, not unkindly. This is business. You're a civilian caught in crossfire. I stopped being a civilian when I moved into this house, when I started learning how this world works. Lena looked at Alessio. You said I needed to decide who I wanted to be. Someone who flinches when things get ugly, or someone who stands their ground. I'm standing. Alessio studied her for a long moment. If you stay, you're a target. They'll keep pushing, keep testing, keep looking for ways to use you against me. Then teach me how not to be used. Lena leaned forward, her hands flat on the conference table. You've been training me to fight, to observe, to understand power dynamics. Extend that training. Make me someone they can't manipulate because I see them coming. Stephen, the analyst, actually smiled. She's got spine. I like her. Spine gets you killed if you don't have strategy to back it up. Antonio's tone was skeptical. What exactly are you proposing, Miss Hart? I'm proposing I stop being passive in this. Stop being something that needs protecting and start being part of the solution. Lena looked around the table. The Westbrooks think I'm weak, that I can be manipulated through guilt or fear or sentiment. Let them keep thinking that while we use their assumptions against them. Alessio's expression shifted from concern to calculation. You want to play bait. I want to be useful. There's a difference. But Lena met his eyes. You told me power comes from understanding what people need and providing it. The Westbrooks need me to be a weakness. We can give them that while actually setting a trap. The room fell silent while everyone processed this. Marco looked dubious. Stephen looked intrigued. Antonio looked like he was reassessing everything he'd assumed about Lena. Finally, Alessio spoke. If we do this, and that's a significant if, you follow my instructions exactly. No improvising. No mercy missions like the warehouse. You do what I tell you, when I tell you, or the whole thing falls apart. Agreed. And if at any point I decide the risk is too high, you accept that decision without argument. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Rachel stays with you at all times. You don't go anywhere, meet anyone, or make any decisions without clearing it through me first. Yes. Alessio looked at Antonio. Your assessment. Can this work? Antonio stroked his jaw thoughtfully. Depends on execution. The Westbrooks are arrogant, but not stupid. They'll be watching for traps. But if Miss Hart can sell vulnerability convincingly, he shrugged. It might work, especially if they think they're winning. Stephen, I want full surveillance on all Westbrook properties. Financial tracking, communications monitoring, everything we can get legally and otherwise. Alessio was in full operational mode now, his voice crisp with command. Marco, pull in our contacts at the Port Authority. I want to know every shipment the Westbrooks have coming through in the next month. If they're planning something, it'll show up in their logistics. The meeting continued for another hour, strategies forming and reforming as they wargamed different scenarios. Lena listened and learned, watching how Alessio's mind worked through problems with ruthless efficiency. He was 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room, anticipating objections before they formed, seeing connections others missed. When they finally broke, Antonio approached Lena directly. "You handled that well. Most civilians would have panicked or tried to pretend they weren't involved. I spent 3 years pretending. I'm done with it." His smile was approving. "Alessio's instincts are usually good. I think he might be right about you." He paused. "But understand something, Miss Hart. The life you're choosing. It doesn't come with an exit ramp. Once you're in this deep, you don't get to go back to normal. Make sure it's really what you want before you commit." After everyone left, Lena found herself alone with Alessio in the conference room. He was gathering papers, his movements precise, but she could feel the tension radiating off him. "Say it," she said quietly. "Whatever you're thinking." He set the papers down and turned to face her. "I'm thinking that I should send you away. Put you on a plane to somewhere the Westbrooks can't reach and handle this without you." "But you won't." "No, because you'd hate me for it, and because you're right. You're not someone who needs protecting anymore. You're someone capable of standing beside me." He moved closer. "But that doesn't mean I'm comfortable with you being bait." "I'm not comfortable with it either, but I'm more uncomfortable with hiding and letting you handle everything alone." Alessio reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture unexpectedly tender. "When did you become so brave?" "When I met someone who made me think I could be." Lena's voice came out softer than intended. "You told me I'd been made small for 3 years. You've spent the last month showing me I could be something else. This is me choosing to be something else. Even if it's dangerous? Especially if it's dangerous. Safe never got me anything worth keeping." His hand lingered near her face, and Lena felt the air between them shift into something charged and complicated. They'd been dancing around this for weeks, the attraction neither of them wanted to name, the tension that built every time they were alone together. "After this is over," Alessio said quietly, "we're going to have a conversation about what we are to each other, a real one, with actual definitions and commitments." "Why wait?" "Because I won't blur lines while you're in danger. Won't take advantage of adrenaline or proximity or the strange intimacy of shared danger." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "When we have that conversation, I want you clear-headed and certain, not caught up in the moment." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to close the distance between them and see what happened. But he was right. They had time, assuming they survived what was coming. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in strategic manipulation. Stephen's surveillance caught Thomas Westbrook meeting with several of Alessio's business rivals, clearly building a coalition. Marco's port contacts revealed a major shipment scheduled for the end of the month, something big enough that the Westbrooks were pulling in resources from multiple territories. And Lena played her part perfectly. She started taking walks in the neighborhood, always with Rachel shadowing her, but at enough distance to appear vulnerable. She made sure to look uncertain, anxious, like someone in over her head. She even orchestrated a lunch with Maya at a restaurant she knew the Westbrooks had under surveillance, carefully dropping comments about feeling scared and trapped in Alessio's world. Maya, who remained blissfully unaware of the actual stakes, spent the entire lunch trying to convince Lena to get away from whatever weird situation you're in before it gets worse. It would have been funny if it weren't so close to genuine danger. The trap was sprung on a Wednesday night. Lena received another text from the mysterious number. "You wanted out. Now's your chance. Black car at the corner of 5th and Morrison at midnight, alone. We'll take you somewhere Moretti can't follow." She showed Alessio immediately. He read it 3 times, his expression unreadable. "They think you're ready to run," he said finally, "that the pressure's gotten to you. So we let them think they're rescuing me, follow them back to whoever sent the text, and confirm it's Westbrook." Lena tried to sound confident. "Simple. Simple plans are usually the ones that get people killed." Alessio pulled out his phone and started texting. "Rachel will be in the car with you, hidden. Marco's team will follow at distance. I'll be monitoring from here with Stephen. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you abort. Rachel will handle extraction." "What if they search the car for bugs or tracking devices?" "They will. But they won't find them because Stephen's tech is better than theirs." Alessio looked up from his phone. "Last chance to change your mind, Lena. I can handle this without using you as bait. I know, but we're stronger together than apart. She managed to smile. You taught me that. Midnight found Lena standing on the corner of 5th and Morrison, her breath forming clouds in the December air. Rachel was already in position, concealed in the back of the black sedan that had pulled up exactly on time. The driver was a woman Lena didn't recognize, middle-aged and professional-looking. Miss Hart? The driver asked through the lowered window. We're here to help you. Please get in. Lena climbed into the back seat, her heart hammering. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly. She waited for the driver to ask questions or explain where they were going, but the woman just drove in silence, taking turns that seemed random until Lena realized they were heading toward the warehouse district near the port. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alessio. We're tracking you. Marco's team is 3 cars back. You're doing great. The car finally pulled into an underground garage beneath a building Lena didn't recognize. The driver got out and opened Lena's door. This way, please. They took an elevator up 3 floors and emerged into what looked like a corporate office. Sleek, modern, completely normal, except for the 2 armed guards flanking the elevator. The driver led Lena down a hallway to a corner office where Thomas Westbrook waited behind a massive desk. He was older than Lena expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd been handsome once before power had carved it into something harder. He smiled when she entered, the expression not reaching his eyes. Miss Hart, thank you for coming. Please, sit. Lena sat, hyper-aware that Rachel was 3 floors below in the car, and Marco's team was outside the building. She was alone with a man who'd been using her as a pawn for weeks. I imagine you have questions, Thomas said, settling into his chair with practiced ease. A few, starting with why you've been manipulating me. His eyebrows rose. Direct? I like that. Alessio chose well. I'm not his possession. Of course not. You're a person with agency and intelligence, which is why I'm hoping we can have a reasonable conversation. Thomas steepled his fingers. I have a proposition for you, Miss Hart, one that benefits everyone involved. I'm listening. Alessio Moretti is a dangerous man. You know this already. He's involved in activities that range from morally questionable to outright criminal. Staying close to him puts you at risk. Risk of violence, legal trouble, worse. Thomas's voice was smooth, reasonable. But you didn't choose this life. You stumbled into it because you needed help after Victor Hale mistreated you. Lena kept her expression neutral. And you're offering what, exactly? A way out? Protection, resources, a chance to start over somewhere safe, away from Moretti's influence. He pulled a folder from his desk and slid it across. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement, enough to live comfortably anywhere you choose. All you have to do is walk away from Alessio and provide some information about his operations. There it was, the real ask. They didn't just want her gone, they wanted her to betray Alessio in the process. Lena opened the folder and scanned the documents. The settlement amount was staggering, more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes. Enough to disappear completely, start fresh, never worry about rent or bills or serving entitled rich people ever again. That's a lot of money, she said carefully. It's fair compensation for the value of the information you can provide. Details about Alessio's shipping routes, his financial arrangements, his security protocols. Nothing that would put him in serious legal jeopardy. We're not looking to destroy him, just level the playing field. Lena looked up from the papers. And if I refuse? Thomas's smile never wavered. Then you continue living in danger, surrounded by violence, waiting for the day when Alessio's enemies use you to hurt him. Is that really the future you want, Miss Hart? Because from where I sit, you're an intelligent woman who got caught up in something beyond her control. I'm offering you a clean exit. It was a good pitch. Almost convincing if you didn't know that Thomas Westbrook was the one who'd put her in danger in the first place, that he'd orchestrated the warehouse incident specifically to test whether she'd interfere with Alessio's operations. I need time to think about it, Lena said. Of course, but not too much time. The offer expires in 72 hours. Thomas stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Think carefully, Miss Hart. This is about your future. Don't let misplaced loyalty to a criminal destroy your chance at a real life. The driver escorted Lena back to the car. Rachel was exactly where she'd been left, and as soon as they pulled out of the garage, she emerged from her hiding spot. "You okay?" Rachel asked, her hand on her weapon. "Yeah, Westbrook made his pitch. It was about what we expected. Marco's team tracked 3 other people entering that building while you were inside. 2 were muscle, 1 we identified as Catherine Westbrook." Rachel's expression was grim. They're definitely working together, father and daughter. Lena's phone rang. Alessio's name flashed on the screen. "Tell me," he said without preamble. Lena relayed the entire conversation while the car wound through late-night streets back toward Alessio's house. When she finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. "He's making his move," Alessio said finally. "The shipment at the port, that's the real play. He wants you out of the way, and my attention divided so he can move whatever he's bringing in without interference. So what do? We give him what he thinks he wants." Alessio's voice carried dark satisfaction. "You're going to accept his offer, Lena. At least, that's what he's going to think." The final confrontation happened 3 nights later at the port. Stephen's surveillance had confirmed the Westbrook shipment was arriving at midnight, and Thomas had arranged a meeting to finalize Lena's defection at the same time, clearly hoping the distraction would give him cover. Lena wore a wire that Stephen swore was undetectable. Rachel stayed closer this time, along with 4 other members of Alessio's security team. And Alessio himself waited in a surveillance van 2 blocks away, monitoring everything through cameras and audio feeds. Thomas Westbrook looked pleased when Lena arrived at the designated warehouse near the docks. Catherine stood beside him, beautiful and cold in a designer coat that probably cost more than Lena used to make in a year. "Miss Hart, I'm glad you made the right choice." Thomas pulled out a briefcase and opened it, revealing stacks of cash. "Your settlement, as promised. All you need to do is sign the agreement and provide the information we discussed." Lena moved closer, looking at the money. It was real, tangible, proof that this was actually happening. "Before I sign," she said slowly, "I want to know why. Why go through all this trouble just to distract Alessio from one shipment?" Thomas smiled. "Because this isn't just one shipment, Miss Hart. This is the beginning of a new operational structure in this city. Alessio Moretti has controlled key territories for too long. It's time for a changing of the guard. By using me to manipulate him. By identifying his weakness and exploiting it. Nothing personal, just business." Thomas's expression hardened slightly. "Now, if you'll sign the agreement, we can all move forward." Lena picked up the pen he offered, looked at the paper, looked at Catherine, who was watching with barely concealed contempt. "One more question," Lena said. "Did you know what Victor did to me? When you sent those texts, when you orchestrated everything, did you know your fiancé had brutalized me?" Catherine's smile was razor sharp. "I knew Victor had a fling with some nobody. I knew that nobody was stupid enough to think it meant something. Beyond that?" She shrugged. "I didn't particularly care. You were useful as leverage. That's all that mattered." The casual cruelty of it took Lena's breath away. Not because it hurt. She was long past being hurt by the Hales and Westbrooks of the world, but because it was so perfectly calibrated to remind her of what she'd been to these people. Nobody important, a tool to be used and discarded. Lena set down the pen without signing. "Actually, I think I'll pass on your generous offer, Mr. Westbrook." The temperature in the warehouse dropped 10 degrees. Thomas's pleasant expression froze. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I'm not betraying Alessio. I'm not taking your blood money, and I'm definitely not helping you expand your operations into his territory." Lena smiled, and it felt good, felt powerful. "But thank you for confirming everything we needed to know about your plans." Thomas's face went from surprised to furious in seconds. "You're wearing a wire." "I am, and Alessio's been listening to everything you just admitted." Lena took a step back as Rachel and the security team materialized from the shadows. "You were right about one thing, though. I was leverage, just not the kind you thought." The warehouse doors burst open and Alessio walked in with a dozen men behind him, all of them armed and radiating controlled violence. Behind them came a group Lena didn't recognize, official-looking people in windbreakers with badges visible. "Thomas Westbrook," one of the badge wearers announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit customs fraud, bribery of port officials, and illegal importation of controlled substances. You have the right to remain silent." The rest got lost in the chaos as Westbrook's security team tried to resist, realized they were outnumbered 5-1, and surrendered with varying degrees of grace. Catherine tried to run but got stopped by Rachel, who looked entirely too pleased about the tackle. Alessio walked straight to Lena, ignoring the arrests and shouting around them. His pale eyes scanned her from head to toe, checking for damage. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Better than okay. That was incredible. Lena was shaking with adrenaline and triumph. "Did we get everything?" "Everything. Full confession, admission of the smuggling operation, even acknowledgement that they knew they were trying to displace me. Between Stephen's evidence and your wire, the federal prosecutor has enough to put them away for years." Alessio's hand found hers, fingers tangling together. "You did perfectly." "I had good teachers." Around them, the warehouse was clearing out. The federal agents were processing the Westbrooks and their associates. Alessio's team was methodically documenting everything, protecting their own interests while the government handled the prosecution. "What happens now?" Lena asked. "Now, the Westbrooks face federal charges that will tie up their operations for years. Their shipping routes get seized, their political connections get exposed, and anyone who thought about following their example gets a very clear message about what happens when you target my people." Alessio pulled her closer. "And you get to decide what comes next for you." "What do you mean?" "The threat's gone. You're safe. You could walk away from all this if you wanted. I'd make sure you had everything you needed to start over somewhere clean." His voice was carefully neutral. "Or you could stay. Keep learning. Keep building the life we've started here. But the choice is yours, Lena. It always has been." Lena looked around the warehouse at the evidence of what she'd just accomplished. A month ago, she'd been nobody important, a waitress who'd wasted 3 years on a man who didn't value her. Now she'd just helped take down a major criminal operation and walked away from enough money to live comfortably for life because she'd chosen loyalty over convenience. She thought about Alessio's house, the bedroom suite that had slowly become hers as she'd added personal touches. The training sessions every morning, the business meetings where she'd learned to read power and navigate complicated negotiations. The way Alessio looked at her like she was someone worth protecting and someone capable of standing on her own in the same breath. "I'm staying," she said. "Obviously." Alessio's smile was genuine, transforming his usually controlled expression into something warm and open. "Yeah? Yeah, you promised we'd have a conversation after this was over, about what we are to each other. I'm ready for that conversation." "Here? Now?" He looked around at the warehouse, the arrests, the organized chaos. "Right here, right now, because I don't want there to be any doubt." Lena moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "I'm staying because I'm in love with you. Because somewhere between you teaching me to fight and showing me what real power looks like, I stopped being afraid and started being someone I actually recognize. And that person doesn't want to be anywhere but here with you, building whatever this becomes." The warehouse had gone silent. Lena realized dimly that everyone was watching. Rachel, Marco, the security team, probably half the federal agents. She didn't care. Alessio's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone the way it had that day in the conference room. "You're sure? Because there's no going back after this. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, and everyone in this city will know it." "I'm sure." He kissed her then, fierce and claiming and somehow gentle all at once. Lena kissed him back, pouring weeks of tension and fear and wanting into it, and distantly heard someone, probably Marco, mutter, "Finally," before Rachel shushed him. When they finally broke apart, Alessio rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," in case that wasn't clear. It was pretty clear, but hearing it doesn't hurt. They stood there for another moment, wrapped up in each other while the warehouse cleared around them. Finally, Alessio pulled back slightly. "Come on, let's go home." Home. Not his house or the place Lena was staying. Home. The words settled into her chest and felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. 6 months later, Lena stood in the same library where she'd first started her business courses and looked at the acceptance letter in her hands. Full scholarship to the MBA program at the State University, with enough flexibility that she could continue working with Alessio while completing her degree. "Congratulations," Alessio said from the doorway. He'd been watching her read the letter, his expression proud and satisfied. "I can't believe I got in." "I can. Your application was exceptional." He moved into the room and pulled her into his arms. "Though I may have made a few calls to ensure they understood what a valuable candidate you were." Lena pulled back to glare at him. "You didn't. I made calls vouching for your character and work ethic. What they did with that information was entirely their decision." His smile was unrepentant. "Besides, you earned this. The calls just made sure they actually read your application instead of dismissing it." It should have annoyed her. A month ago, it would have. But Lena had learned that Alessio's version of support often looked like opening doors and then stepping back to let her walk through them. He'd given her opportunities, but she'd been the one to work for them, to prove she belonged. The past 6 months had been a strange kind of wonderful. Lena had continued training with Rachel, had started sitting in on actual business negotiations instead of just observing. Alessio had slowly integrated her into the legitimate side of his operations, the property management, the security consulting, the investments that didn't require looking the other way. She'd also started a foundation. Nothing massive yet, just a small fund that helped women leave abusive situations and rebuild their lives. It was funded partially by Alessio's money and partially by profits from his legitimate businesses, and it gave Lena a purpose beyond just existing in his world. Victor had disappeared. Rumor said he'd moved to the West Coast, that the Hale family had quietly removed him from any significant role at Hale Industries after the engagement fell apart. Lena didn't track him, didn't care where he ended up. That chapter of her life was closed, sealed, irrelevant to who she'd become. "There's something else," Alessio said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I was going to wait until dinner, but this seems like the right moment." Lena's heart stopped. The box was the exact size and shape of... He opened it, revealing a ring that was somehow both elegant and understated. A single diamond set in platinum, the kind of thing that suggested permanence without being ostentatious. "I know it's fast," Alessio said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "We've only been together 6 months, but I've spent those 6 months watching you transform into someone extraordinary, and I don't want to spend another day without making this official." He paused. "Marry me, Lena. Not because you owe me or because I'm protecting you, but because we're better together than apart. Because I want to build a life with you that's ours, not mine or yours, but something we create together." Lena stared at the ring, at Alessio's face, at the library that had become one of her favorite rooms in a house that had become her home. 6 months ago, she'd been a waitress drowning champagne in humiliation. Now she was someone who took down criminal operations, who ran a foundation helping other women, who was starting an MBA and dating, about to marry, one of the most powerful men in the city. "Yes," she said, not even needing to think about it. "Yes, obviously yes." Alessio's smile could have lit the entire house. He slid the ring onto her finger, perfect fit, because of course he'd somehow figured out her size, and kissed her with the kind of intensity that suggested the celebration might not wait until after dinner. "One condition," Lena said when they broke apart. "Name it." "I want the foundation to be part of our lives. Not just something I do on the side, but something we build together. Something that uses your resources and my experience to actually help people." "Done. Anything else?" Lena thought about it. About the girl who dropped that champagne tray and the woman she'd become. About all the ways her life had imploded and reformed into something she'd never imagined wanting, but now couldn't imagine losing. No more secrets between us. Complete honesty, even when it's ugly or complicated. If we're doing this, I want all of it. The legitimate businesses and the gray areas and everything in between. I want to know who I'm partnering with. Alessio's expression sobered. "Some of what I do, Lena, some of the things I've done to build what I have, they're not pretty. Not moral or justifiable or easy to live with. I know, and I want to know them anyway. All of it." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but we do this in pieces. I'm not dumping everything on you at once." "Fair." They stood there in the library, wrapped around each other, while the afternoon sun poured through the windows and turned everything golden. Somewhere in the house, Diana was probably preparing dinner. Rachel was off duty but would be back tomorrow for their morning training session. The world kept turning, kept presenting challenges and dangers and opportunities. But for the first time in her life, Lena felt ready for all of it. Not because she was fearless. She was still terrified half the time, still learning, still making mistakes. But because she'd learned that fear didn't have to be paralyzing, that being afraid and doing it anyway was its own kind of power. "I love you," she said, looking up at Alessio. "I don't say it enough, but I do. You gave me my life back." "No." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "You took your life back. I just made sure you had the tools to do it." Maybe that was true. Maybe transformation was always a choice, a decision to become something different than what circumstances had made you. Maybe Lena had always had the strength to rebuild herself, and Alessio had just shown her where to start. Or maybe it was both. Maybe that's what real partnership looked like. Two people who saw potential in each other and built something better than either could have created alone. Either way, standing in that library with a ring on her finger and a future spread out before her like an open road, Lena Hart knew one thing for certain. She was nobody's victim anymore. Nobody's weakness. Nobody's afterthought. She was Lena Hart, soon to be Lena Moretti. She ran a foundation, was starting an MBA, could disarm someone twice her size and negotiate a business deal in the same afternoon. She'd helped bring down a criminal empire and walked away from blood money because loyalty mattered more than wealth. The girl who'd dropped the champagne tray was gone. The woman who'd replaced her was stronger, smarter, more dangerous, and more compassionate all at once. And that woman was exactly who Lena had always had the potential to be. She just needed someone to believe in her long enough for her to believe in herself. The rest would come. Challenges, dangers, complications that she couldn't anticipate yet. But standing there with Alessio, with her future unfurling in beautiful uncertainty, Lena wasn't afraid. She was ready.